So, all right, I just got a message from Assembly Member Jim Frazier's office. He is looking forward to meeting with the school superintendents. It is on his calendar for the 29th. So he just wanted to share that. We do have a lot of questions, and gentlemen, I really thank you for again being above the noise, right? Being here to provide information so that parents can ask and then make the choice themselves. So we're going to go into questions if you're ready. There are a lot of questions, and for the folks at home, you can text your question to 855-773-1020. All right, Tracy, you're
Okay,
going to take it
gentlemen, this
first.
is like quick, not quickies, but we have an hour, right? And we want to get every question answered if we can. So get your pens out. And I just want to say a quick thank you ahead of time. We've got a ton of questions, and the audience, I feel like you've been gracious. There was a lot of assumptions made tonight, and we're getting into the nitty gritty and the important part. So text us. Don't think we're going to run out of time. If you have a question that comes up, text, ask, and we're going to rock and see what else we can learn. So thank you. Okay. So the very first question, so we're going to start with the people who started texting an hour ago, just so everybody understands where we're going. But a common theme to the doctors are, if COVID is so different, and I don't know that you have this answer, but is there any justification, or could you find any justification of why this mandate would be asked to be put upon our kids if it seems that it is gentle, children haven't died? Are the vaccines different? They look like they're going to be different. Just any help on why, which you might not have, but.
When we talk about implementing a mandate or implementing a policy, it's important to remember that it starts with your sense of risk tolerance. How much risk are you willing to tolerate? And that differs among people. And if you look at the reactions to COVID across our state, you find very low risk tolerance in the Bay Area, in LA, very high risk tolerance in the Central Valley and Northern California. And that reflects a personal belief in risk tolerance. And that frames what makes sense as a rule. So I can tell you that we've had 63 children hospitalized since the start of the pandemic. And you can say, yeah, that's nothing. I mean, there are that many kids hospitalized every week from injuries. And well, I should let you know, or you should say how many kids are hospitalized for injuries. But the point is, there's lots of reasons kids get hospitalized. Is that a big number? You can also say, wow, this is a brand new disease and it scares me and I don't want any children hospitalized. So if your risk tolerance is no harm to children, you're going to come up with a very different answer than if you look at that number and say, yeah, it doesn't really faze me. So risk tolerance frames the question. Your personal beliefs and philosophies frame the question. And those philosophies are themselves bounded by your confirmation bias. How open are you to being shown that you're wrong? If you're not open to being shown that you're wrong, then your philosophical belief is dogmatic and you have a lot of confirmation bias, and it's going to be hard to move you on that subject. Versus, yeah, I mean, I feel this way right now, but okay, I'm willing to change if you show me this. And so personal beliefs, the degree to which they're bounded by confirmation bias, and risk tolerance are really important in decision-making on mandates. Far less important, sadly for me, is data and science. Because if we were being strictly objective, the first thing you do when you contemplate a mandate is ask yourself, what is the benefit and what is the harm? And how do I measure the harm versus the benefit? And there is harm that tracks with every policy. There is harm with every mandate. If your risk tolerance is very low and you dogmatically believe in wanting to have no risk, then you accept the downside as irrelevant. Conversely, if your risk tolerance is high and you're not dogmatically attached with conservative approach to healthcare, but rather are more liberal, i.e. you're more pro-choice than you are pro-community decision-making for you, then you're going to end up on the opposite side of that question with the same data. So it's a hard question to answer because we don't make these decisions based on data. We make them based on these other factors far more. So what, for example, can be a harm of a mandate for COVID vaccination for children? Well, let's start with what's the benefit. COVID, as we in the medical side agree, is not as serious for young children as influenza. If you look at the pattern of harm by age, I would say COVID is more dangerous than flu once you get above the age of 50. Once you get above the age of 65 or 70, it's way more dangerous. It's 10 to 15 times more dangerous to get COVID as a 75-year-old than flu. But once you get below age 50, flu becomes increasingly more likely to cause harm than COVID for the same person. And in children, I would say that flu is more harmful than COVID on a per child basis. So if you parse the data, then you can't use the same mandate argument for an adult as you do for a child. Okay, so the benefit from a hazard standpoint might actually be relatively small to mandate vaccination. To offer vaccination, cool, not a problem. I don't think anybody would have an issue with that, but to mandate it. Now, if you mandate it, but you allow people an out, a philosophical exemption, well, that's a paper tiger. So go ahead and mandate it because it doesn't really change the real world. It's not until you accrue a penalty for failure to adhere to the mandate that the math changes. So as an epidemiologist, and let me say, I've been called a lot of things, rarely an epidemiologist. I've learned so many four-letter words over the past 2 years. I mean, one of the benefits of this job has been an expansion of my vocabulary in a really, really meaningful way. But let me just suggest that if you look at the data, there are many people who are politically self-described as more conservative, who philosophically object to vaccination than there are those who consider themselves liberal. There are many more people among African American and Blacks and among Latinx and Hispanic who have chosen not to be vaccinated than Asians and whites. So if you impose a mandate whose penalty is failure to attend school, then you will be inequitably impacting that community. You will inequitably have people who are of color not permitted to attend school. Now, we all know that not being able to attend school in the manner you want is harmful to your child. I genuinely respect the statements about homeschooling, about charter schools. I think that those are awesome options, but my point is not allowing a child to be educated in the manner that the family wants is harmful to that child. We saw that, right? So if you are going to impose a mandate whose penalty is you cannot attend school, then you will be, in essence, intolerant and racist in this decision. So it's not, to me, that's not a wise decision. So again, let me be really, really clear. As health officer, if I felt that the benefits of such a mandate outweighed the harms, I would issue it. And I really wouldn't care that you guys would hate me for it, because I just wouldn't care. I would want the kids protected. And there's no way that I would not require polio vaccination for school. I'm sorry, polio is too dangerous. I'm not okay. And granted, it's almost been eradicated. That's not the point. When it was prevalent, it needed to be vaccinated against. H-flu has to be vaccinated against. It's too deadly for kids. COVID doesn't meet that mark for me. And so the downside becomes more important than the upside. Now, that's purely a hazard balance decision. So I want to be really clear. I don't have a philosophical position on this. I don't believe that it's my place to tell a community what they should want, nor is it my power to tell the state what it wants to do. So if it comes down as it has as a mandate and we have to implement it, I'm duty bound to support that mandate. But to answer the question of should we or shouldn't we? Sorry, I don't actually know how to answer short. So yeah, anyway, you got to look at both sides, and honestly, the science is probably the least important part in decisions on mandates.
Thank you. Next question, why are there different age groups for vaccination approval? If the vaccine is believed to be safe for all children, then why do different age groups require authorization?
Okay. The reason vaccinations have been done in phases is because, as we all know, COVID has been much more harmful to adults and especially elderly than it has been to children. That was known back in December of 2019, and nothing about that has changed. So we started with the people most vulnerable, those who are adults. So it was first trialed in adults because they were the ones at greatest risk of a bad outcome. And then it has been trialed in younger and younger groups, mostly because of demands by people for vaccination in those younger groups, coupled with companies aren't dumb. They want to make money. So of course they're going to make their vaccine available for more people. So there's nothing bizarre about this process. This is how it works for most vaccines, unless it's a childhood killer, and then you study it in kids first rather than adults.
Hear me? Dr. Barco, could you speak to myocarditis? So that is a huge narrative on every social media platform. And as a mom of a 12-year-old son, it has caused me harm because he's of age technically. And so I know that is a huge concern.
Yeah, so yeah, specifically, what we know from the natural virus from COVID is that it can cause myocarditis, and the vaccination this has been the one side effect that we have watched for most significantly. First off, many are worried about vaccinations and the long-term side effects. One of the beauties of understanding history, when you look back at the testing of vaccinations, almost all long-term side effects show up within the first 2 months of vaccination. And we've had that period. We've been looking at it. And so we can talk to you honestly about what we see. The myocarditis that we see with vaccination mirrors what is happening from the virus in and of itself at a much lesser level. So much like a vaccine can cause, a flu vaccine can cause fever, yes, because the actual flu virus causes fevers much higher and much longer, and so we see that effect going on. What we know about that right now is that there are males in the teenage group are at highest risk for myocarditis. It doesn't matter whether we're talking vaccine or wild type COVID infection. And currently our cardiologists are following those patients. What you would need to know from the vaccine, first off, knowing that the infection itself brings more severe myocarditis, is that the vaccine brings a short, limited bit of trouble that needs to be watched for. It is self-limited. None of those patients that we are aware of from our cardiology group have needed invasive or aggressive treatment. And at the same time, I find a lot of parents come and say, whoa, 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 I'm trying to stay away from this disease that might ground my athlete, my teen for whatever reason. And now they feel like they're playing a little game of roulette. There is the nuance. You will hear that word maybe 15 times out of me tonight. Is it worthwhile to risk a short-lived and self-limited problem for a few weeks, or potentially be out for longer based on a wild type infection? And that's a risk assessment that everyone has to make. Just so you understand our protocols, athletes at this current moment, if they're above age 13, they will not only be excluded for their isolation, but if they get actual COVID, they will be isolated for their 10 days at home. And then they have a 7-day re-entry into sport, watching them progressively come back to sport. We recommend that they progress slowly back to demonstrate if they have any signs of myocarditis from that. So all athletes will miss 2.5 weeks of sport based on a natural infection. And so that I warn parents of that as well, because sometimes I don't want to feel like we played a bait and switch in the office. And they're like, wait a minute, he can't go back for how long? And this is important as well. My local cardiologists that live in this service area are not following anyone currently for myocarditis from the vaccine. Those numbers are incredibly small. The phrase I would use, you may have more chance of going outside and getting hit by a bus right now, and you're not thinking about it, or worrying about it. But the risk is not zero. Right? It is never zero. And that has to be considered. So hopefully that helps in that area. Okay, if there's no buses on Main Street, the risk is zero. Oh, we just confirmed that. Okay.
Sorry, I'll just keep my mic on. So since you brought up sports, this one's kind of to Ed. One of the questions that came up was, can you clarify, and this goes to the doctors too, I think, what is the current protocol for athletes specifically, cheerleaders, whoever, who are vaccinated, who test negative but have been exposed, they can go to school, but the understanding is they're not participating in sports, or there's confusion about what does this look like for our kids?
Sure. And these are the CDPH guidelines. So for our athletes, if an athlete is vaccinated and a close contact, considered a close contact, and don't have any symptoms, they can not only stay in school, but they can continue to practice and play their sport. If they are unvaccinated, they can test and stay in school and are unable to play their sport for 10 days.
All right, there we go. I'm on now. So part of that is the relative risk, and that is also something that we've tried to parse that out. What is necessity? Basic principle in medicine. One of the best corollaries for health and success as an adult is a primary education, getting to your graduation. And I think people don't think about education as being a health standard, but we care about that. So graduation is incredibly important for your adult health. And so we want to see everyone succeed at that point. While a football championship would be incredibly wonderful for the community, it does not necessarily determine what your health outcomes are in the long-lasting future. And so that is deemed one of those things that can be given up. Your contact with other people is close. It is not necessarily protected. And as you've watched over time, you've seen us do this progressive, whether, how much of an isolation are you going to have for members? And the idea is let's keep them in their educational experience, because that is crucial and critical. And yet we put a second tier on that and saying that some of these other activities do not have to be attended at this time. And that's where that isolation comes from.
But in theory, the thinking that in class, children all have to wear masks. So there is some additional level of interpersonal protection so that if the exposed kid becomes positive and in the time prior to being symptomatic, they wouldn't have spread it as easily to colleagues in a classroom as they would to colleagues in a sports team where they aren't masked. So it comes down again to risk tolerance. Those of you who are saying this is bogus are operating from the standpoint that the risk that I just described is so low, it doesn't warrant that decision. You need to know that the decisions that come from the state come from a position of risk tolerance that is different than the community of Vacaville. It's different. It's not different than the community of San Francisco. It's not different than LA. So there are many people in the state who resonate with that level of risk tolerance, and there are many who don't. So I have no choice in supporting or not supporting. It has nothing to do with the local health department. It bypasses us completely. It goes from the state to the school. Schools are stuck. And the schools get no money if they don't follow, so kind of a big penalty.
I just want to say that that's the important takeaway, is that because we are all frustrated, but I think that the big takeaway is that the state has imposed things that don't make sense to many of us, like Bayla said, but does make sense to other communities.
Right.
So we may all agree, and the district has to take all of the vim and vigor and anger that we have because of what our children are going through and still have to follow the rule because they can't change it. We can talk about advocacy, but I think it's important to give some grace that they just have to take all of our anger at this point
And
because it's coming from the state.
And can I just add one thing, and I understand this frustration. Part of what we've seen, and again, we don't have lots and lots of data, but we do have some data that our students who are being considered close contact in schools are overwhelmingly testing negative. And so we've talked to Dr. Machias and tried to say, you know, can we look at that? Can we look at what's defined as a close contact? We understand that frustration with it. And so we are pursuing that, but we can't just ignore it.
And, you know, we try from the local health department to give as much latitude to the school district as we can. We try to cut corners anywhere we can to be able to help you, but there are limits. I do also want to note that in our county, we had Kairos and 9 other schools open and operating through the worst of the pandemic. They followed our guidance. They followed our guidance and did not have a single outbreak. The Sacramento Christian Diocese operated what, 30 schools through the pandemic, followed the guidance, didn't have any outbreaks. So it's obvious that things can be done safely if people actually are rigorous and adhere to it. And so I don't want you to think that those of us who are up here necessarily agree with these guidelines, but you also have to respect the fact that we don't control them.
Next question. Is there consideration in data for people who have had COVID and have natural antibodies?
You know, that's an excellent question. It's one of the things that, from a strictly biological standpoint, we have totally been ignoring natural immunity. Now, having said that, you all also need to know that natural immunity isn't the same for everyone, right? If you think about COVID, you've got people who die. Okay, no natural immunity, sorry. That's a gallows humor, sorry. It just comes with the territory. But people who are hospitalized and people who have very severe illness with a high fever, they're down for 2 or 3 weeks, they probably develop substantial natural immunity having recovered from that illness. The other end of the spectrum, people that are asymptomatic develop no natural immunity. People who have a mild course of illness develop no natural immunity. So it's not as simple as to say if you were positive for COVID, you're immune. And that has proven to be very difficult to work with. For every other vaccine preventable disease except COVID, we have neutralizing antibody serology tests, which tell us how much immunity do you have. But we don't have that test. So if we had that test, then we could regulate to immunity instead of regulating to vaccination. But we regulate to vaccination. So antibody tests tell you you've been exposed, right? But if you've just been exposed, you also want to know, do I have enough antibody to protect me? It's called neutralizing antibody. So it's antibody that neutralizes the virus. Why is it not available? Sorry, we're bypassing the questioning process.
Part of it, thank you.
But why do we not have it? I cannot tell you how frustrated I am that we don't have it. It's a test that we would employ in lieu of regulating vaccination if we had it, but we don't have it. So, you know, the manufacturing industry, the FDA, the whole process, I don't know why we don't have it. Honestly, I don't.
So it's an opportunity for advocacy, hands down. We all agree to that.
So
Okay,
those of
next
you who said,
question.
just real quick, for those of you who said money, the companies are different. You don't think those other companies want to make money? There's a profit motive for everybody. So it's not that. I don't think there's any conspiracy or nefarious anything. I kind of suspect that like hepatitis C and a few other viruses, it's hard to come up with a test for neutralizing antibody. So the question of, does it matter if you've been, it certainly protects you to some extent that you've had a course of illness. You probably have some natural immunity. You know, biologically, if you don't want to be vaccinated, your best bet is to have a whole series of very low level infections that don't make you very sick, but keep boosting your immunity. But you can't control that. And I would never advocate that because it's not appropriate for me to advocate that. And let me be really, really clear. For elderly and people with underlying health issues, that is not the way to go, all right? Whether the vaccine wanes or doesn't, the risk of death can be so high in a person that vaccination is an imperative to protect them. And really, this comes down to risk tolerance. You can argue that for kids, natural infection is probably the better way to go, but for older people, not. Cool, that's a philosophical discussion. And it's a valid one. But I want to be really clear that the vaccine is effective in a way that natural illness is not always effective, because low levels of natural illness do not give you good antibody protection.
Okay. Okay. So the next question, this is a tough one. Mitch, sorry ahead of time. It's a great question, though. Is there any movement to create a sanctuary city or a county overlay that would allow us to be exempt as a community from the mandate?
That's actually a question that would be probably better posed. There's not a movement. I can tell you that there's not a movement. I can say that there is not that. That hasn't been broached. I have not had that brought to me, nor do I know that there's anybody else on the board who's necessarily had that brought to them. I can tell you that that would be something that would be posed to the county council and the attorneys to be able to tell us if it was even possible for the county to do. At this point, I don't know that there are counties who attempted to do that with the state. The state has executive authority with regard to schools that the counties do not have. We have literally, as a county, no jurisdiction over education as county legislators. Your city officials have no jurisdiction over schools to be able to say that they could be a sanctuary city and disallow that for the schools. The reins, so that everybody understands, and I saw some people in the audience talking about money, the reins that the state holds with regards to the schools, aside from regulation and the ability to just shut them down, is their finance and their budget and the ability to take all of that money away from those schools and those students. They can do that with our local governments. For the local governments, if we wanted to, there was talk about being a sanctuary county or a sanctuary city when they were closing our businesses in Solano County and they wouldn't let us reopen. One of the things that the state does is they hold the reins on a lot of the funds that come through our county. And they have the ability to take those away, which directly affect the services for our communities and would probably most greatly affect those communities that are at risk. Those poor communities where there are food issues and housing issues and those types of things would directly suffer as a result of that. So to stand on principle and say that we were going to be this county or this city that was sanctuary has other impacts besides just making a statement to the state legislature. It has direct impacts to our neighbors. It has direct impacts to kids in our schools. So that all has to be considered. But as of right now, there is not a push to do that.
How many children, like, I'm not sure what the question was, but I guess if you could do a breakdown, do you know census stat off the top of your head? Is that something you know? Anybody? Live in Solano County. Children from 0 to say 17. Anybody? He's doing math. That's why he hasn't picked it. He said there's 75,000 under the age of 12. That's all the question was. So I'm not sure if there's more to it. If you have more to it, go ahead and text us. But so roughly between 100 and 110,000 children. 22% of 450. I feel like a parrot right now. So one of the questions too, this is to Ed. Can you give any information on independent study or what you are anticipating this potential challenge and not knowing how many families are going to make what choice is going to affect the district, whether it means in programming, independent study, all that kind of stuff?
Yes. So the independent study option has taken a kind of a weird twist through this. We have a school that's a School for Independent Learners, KIMI, and Jared has a similar, he has an option for independent learners. last July when they announced that kind of the new rules, and it was mid-July, they defined what independent study looked like, and it looked significantly different than the virtual learning we were able to do last year. And so we got a lot of questions about, look, you got the playbook, you did this, just do that. And because of the instructional minutes, because of the rules that were put in place, we couldn't do that. So we were scrambling because we didn't know on August 1st how many students were doing that. So part of this, and this is part of our worry, and this is what I was attempting to say earlier, part of our concern with this mandate is how many people will want independent study, and then, because then that changes if it's 100 or if it's 1,000, it changes how we deliver it. And our whole hope is that we have enough time to plan this, because last summer from July 15th to August 15th, when school started, was a ridiculous scramble to, and guess what? There's not another 100 teachers just waiting to be hired in case you need it. So that's one of our concerns. That is a struggle to deliver. Now, I will tell you, and I talked to our directors today who are over the independent study programs that we have currently. We have about 125 students in elementary that are on independent study right now. And I have to tell you, that is a variety of people who don't want their children to wear masks, so they are on independent study, and some people who are worried about this disease who are having their students stay and be on independent study. And the secondary, there's about 80 students who are on independent study from 7 through 12. So we're right about 200 right now. But if in the middle of a school year that changed dramatically, of course that pivoting would be ridiculous. And our staff has already done a lot of pivoting on virtual learning and then hybrid learning and then full learning. And so that's one of our concerns.
Just want to add to that, because one of the things I think Ed said that's really important is that we don't have 100 teachers to just throw in and do this. And so if we're giving you talking points to your legislators, we are also facing a staff vaccine mandate. And with that is we're already in a shortage of staff. And so the concern that I have as an educational leader is, what is the who are we going to have serve your children? And are we going to have enough? Because I know my staff, we have about 46% of our staff that chose not to get the vaccine. And we could debate about that or not. But I can't serve your students with 54, 50, I'm doing math in my head now, whatever it is, 53% of teachers and staff. And so that is a concern, and whatever option. And I think, you know, Ed and the district really had to scramble, because like you said, it was July 15th and school started August 13th, 14th, whatever it was. And it was like, okay, now what? We have to scramble. So I think that a lot of this is we are reacting in real time as much as we can, but it comes back down to the state is imposing these mandates that are affecting our staff and our students.
Yeah. So there was a secondary question that for all three education experts of what happens if is there a law in the books currently that there's no in-person requirement for independent study? Like, so I know that if there's an in-person component to independent studies and the vaccine mandate goes through, there won't be any in-person connection with independent study. And then with homeschool, is there any overreach that gets to homeschool with the mandate? So that's kind of a twofold question. Does that make sense? Did I ask it? No. Ed's looking at me like, no, I did not ask that clearly.
The way the wording of the mandate currently says is no in-person learning. So in our circles of working with different associations, we would interpret that to mean, as currently written, that it would mean without, if there was no exemption options, they would not be able to have any in-person learning. That's different than what SB 277 says about being enrolled in an independent study program and not receiving classroom-based instruction, which is a little bit different in definition and technicality than in-person. The in-person literally means in person. So the way it's currently mandated, you would not have that option. But to Bayla's point that he mentioned earlier, if it's through regulation, you can opt out and you can have access to that in person. If you opt out through the personal belief exemption, that does not mean you don't get in person. It literally means you're exempt. But if they put it in legislation and use the words in person, that means you cannot meet in person.
And that would mean you can't play sports, you can't do extracurriculars, you can't do anything, correct?
That is unclear. It says in-person learning. So
Matters, yeah.
learning, I don't know what that means for sports.
That hasn't been answered yet.
Thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, as far as homeschool, currently that's, you're all gravy and maybe a bunch of homeschoolers accidentally show up together and do something in person. I don't know.
Apparently, somebody would like a date with you, Dr. Matsias, and would like your phone number, but we're not going to give your phone number. No, I don't think it was a date question. I just wanted to throw in some laughs.
Oh my, how intelligent and creative that last response was. I was just.
We have to talk you out of this. Okay, go ahead.
All right, next question. Yolo County Schools test for COVID with a spit sample. Why doesn't VUSD offer that instead of a nose swab?
She's looking at you like,
Because the number of tests that we have to give, these were the ones we were able to buy. There has been even a shortage in the antigen tests nationwide. And again, we want to keep kids in school. And so last spring, last spring, we needed some tests to get some students and some athletes and some extracurriculars. And Jared, great, he ran over some boxes of tests and brought them to us. So we just want to make sure we have enough tests, and these have been the ones we've had access to and been able to get. Now, for our staff, we have worked for some who wanted to do the spit test versus that worked, and they've found ways to do that, and we're accepting that. So we don't pick one or the other. It's the ones we can get. And when we're doing lots and lots and lots of them at a time, these are the ones we can get.
The saliva tests are in the for-profit world, and so they're actually have not been made available at super discounts to government the way the others have. So we've been able to buy like millions and millions of kits of the antigen tests, but the other ones, they offered at the same price you buy it at the drugstore. So it's just cost prohibitive.
Great, okay. If Kairos is under the VUSD charter, don't they still have to follow the mandate that VUSD follows?
So the way I explained it earlier is Kairos is an independent charter with its own governing board that operates autonomously. That is part of the charter law is we have an agreement in our charter, which is like the Constitution, and in theory, we're all supposed to follow. We are supposed to mandate the Constitution. We follow our charter, but we're able to operate autonomously based on what our board decides, which may be different than other districts.
So I'm going to tie a couple questions together. So there is a large concern, and I think there's a lot of unknowns. So I just want to take an opportunity to be supportive, and then they can fill in the blanks. So what we don't know is how many parents are going to make what choice. I mean, the district can't tell, nobody can tell us that. And so when this all comes to fruition, they won't know if it's hundreds or thousands or somewhere in the middle and what that's going to do to the budget. Currently, I mean, I should let you speak to this, but currently the state is holding districts harmless. And so they have some more time, but next year they might not be. And so I'll let Ed speak to the deficit, but if 10% of Vacaville Unified students were no longer enrolled, it's a huge blow. It's going to affect teachers, it's going to affect students, it's going to affect the district, and nobody can predict that. And so that's not to say that none of us can't make a choice. I don't know that there's a lot of answers to that, because one of the questions is, is that going to affect the mental health? What do we do about our kids at home with no parents? If they were on independent study and you're working, what does that mean? And I think the district has the same questions, so.
We absolutely have those same questions. And these are the struggles that we're seeing people are going through. If we have a lot of students who leave our school and go hang out with Matt, of course that affects the budget, and we would reduce accordingly. But, I was a first-year principal back in, the real tough recession days, 08, 9, right, 10, in that area. And it was awful. There were class sizes that were getting bigger. This was affecting students. I gave the father of my grandbaby 3 pink slips, 3 years in a row. It was horrible, and it affects kids. I just have to tell you, I'm not on a commission. So if we get more kids, I don't get more money or less. The services, everything we're trying to do are to support our students, support their mental health, support their activities, support their learning. And so if we lose money, we'll reduce staff accordingly. That's one thing you do. But that's never fun. Again, I did that. And so, yeah, these are the concerns of us because of the concerns you have.
So one of the questions that came up was, is it a good time to start, or is there been consideration for collaborative, or is there space for collaborative opportunities between the district, Kairos, and a homeschool, like where a homeschool can get some kind of support if an independent study? Is that something that could happen? Is there a mechanism? Does it work in the universe of rules and all that kind of stuff? I know that's a doozy, but it came through.
I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question, but if there's.
Can the
is-
3 of you collaborate in a way to serve the community?
Well, I think that Matt talked about, we work with homeschool co-ops and everything. I know the district, we work on different things together. I mean, there are certain things that, again, the state doesn't allow us to do. But I mean, I think that we've always at least tried to work together for what's best for the community. So we're in a new dawn, a new age, and I think we can try to figure something out.
We talked earlier about, this is our community, these are our kids, and we have a lot of options. And this is all new to us. Again, some of the answers are, we don't know yet. We don't know what the rules are going to be around it. We don't know how many people are doing it, but we are always open to working in whatever way we need to within this community to serve all of our students, because it benefits us. You know what I learned over the years? Our students come back and live here. So we want them to be super successful, great. They come back as great adults and fit in this community. So that's what we're here to do. And so I would work with anyone as this gets closer in a way that supports our students.
So Matt, can you speak to one of the questions that came through was on a clarification? As a private school, is there any way, a way around the mandate? Like operating a business or a co-op, or is it only through the homeschool option currently?
Yeah, my understanding of it is if you do file a PSA as an organization, right? You file as a private school, you are under the mandates as well. And so when I talk about the campuses that I run specifically is one of the options, we don't file a private school affidavit. Now, because of the way we operate, we can take a look at California's definition of a school. California CDE has put out a definition of a school. This is what a school looks like. This is what a private school would be. We operate in a very different fashion. So I can logically walk anybody through how we don't actually even qualify as a school. So people say, okay, well then what are you? And I go, I don't know, what's essential today? Like we just operate because it's a really actually kind of a hard thing to define. If I'm really going to give it the best definition, it's a workspace for young people. Like that's it, right? So we do that, which means we're a private business, but we're not a private school, thus not under the mandate. My understanding is yes, if it is a private school, you are still going to fall under those regulations.
Thank you. So just a clarification here, the person that was asking for your numbers was actually asking for the data number. If there is any way for you to provide
Pointing that is to here. So they want the site for the data numbers, yeah. If you Google Solano County Public Health, that'll take you to the website. And then there's a big prominent button on the public health page to take you to the vaccine page. So that's where the infographics and information about vaccination are located. The dashboard, you want to Google Solano Public Health dashboard. And then it'll take you to an ArcGIS location that is the actual updated data for the county. And on there, we have data about disease and vaccination. So we have multiple tabs. And look at each box. There's usually several rollovers within each box for additional data. So there's actually quite a bit of information on the dashboard.
Thank you. So what is there, or is there a simple way for homeschools? Is there a state funding for homeschools? Well, so the question was for homeschools or only for charter schools?
Is there state funding? That was the question. So if you are going to get state funding, then what you're going to connect with is a homeschool charter. You are still a public school student at that point, which is what you are getting, right? You are getting some of that money for that student. You are getting some of that funneled to you since you are taking on the primary responsibility. So yes, you are a homeschool family, but you're not. You're still attached to the private. So that's how that would work.
Would be affected
If
by the
not, then
mandate.
then no, there would not be funding.
And if they get money from the state, then they're bound by the mandate or regulation.
You are bound by the mandate and the regulations and however that plays out with your independent, with your homeschool charter representative.
But I also just want to add that there's lots of charter school models out there, and not every charter school gives vouchers or stipends or whatever the term is going to be. And then also each of those organizations have different stipends that they do. And then they have different rules that they set as their organization on what those could be used for. So some let you do soccer and other community events, karate and other things. And then there's other organizations like ours that we have a homeschool component to our program, but we offer 36 different workshops out of our building every week and a lot of enrichment and a community experience. So we don't do vouchers, but in lieu of vouchers, we create a different type of environment. So it varies across the state and organizations on how they do things like that.
All right, Dr. Gaborko, to be clear, does catching COVID seem to cause more or worse myocarditis than the vaccine cause?
Repeat that one for me.
Does catching COVID seem to cause more or worse myocarditis than the vaccine?
Yeah, yes, that is absolutely true. The natural infection causes more myocarditis troubles for our teenagers than the vaccine does. So yeah, just simple fact on how it goes. So the risk of the natural infection, if I were going to give you a picture of where you have to look at this virus, and I think Dr. Montes has spoken to it a little bit, this virus will probably become very endemic, which means you have a date with this virus at some point in your life. The idea that we will somehow ninja avoid it for eternity is not going to be true. And what you want to have is you want to have something on board that is going to help you be safer with that. That burden is much less in our children, so they have their natural health that really does make them more resilient, but is not 100%. And that's where you have to decide whether that vaccine is going to be that helper to make sure that you're prepared. I grew up in the age of old video games, joystick and one little button, and there was a game called Punch Out. You used to try to knock the other player out, and they started you with, some fool who could barely hold up his gloves. They didn't stick you with the Mr. T character right away. And that's kind of the idea, is getting your immune system ready for that. And which leaves you with some of the side effects you see from a vaccine, but that's part of the preparation and having you ready to go. And I think that's what families have to wrestle with, is that the right place to be?
Thank you. So Dr. Matias, why won't or don't you include statistics of those who have contracted the disease and have antibodies and natural immunity? Is that something that you can collect, report? Because the Israeli study shows that 20 times more, the natural immunity is 20 times more effective than the vaccine. So is there a way to capture that data?
There isn't a way to capture the data. As I was saying earlier, there is no test for immunity. There is only a test for exposure. So, you could get a serologic test and say, yep, at some point in the last few months, I was exposed to this virus. There is no test for immunity, so there's no data to gather. I mean, I wish that there were. Obviously, that would make for a much more robust, much more meaningful set of information. But keep this in mind, in our county, about 10% of our residents have been reported with COVID. So, when I throw out a number of 45,000, that's about a tenth of our population. I would estimate, and this is purely an estimate, that about 10 to 20% of those have good natural immunity. So there's about another 4,000 to 5,000 people on top of the hundreds of thousands of people who've been vaccinated who have natural immunity. The other thing, even though we hear about COVID all the time, and even though COVID has a huge impact on the hospital system, it's a relatively uncommon disease, right? I mean, if over the 2 years, only 10% of our population has contracted it, it's not out there hitting everybody all the time. Now, the truth is that there are probably many, many more people than that who had asymptomatic illness. Why would they have been tested? Why would they know? But again, asymptomatic illness confers no benefit for immunity. So the immune benefit of it is not as great as you might think because the numbers of cases as a proportion of the population isn't as high as you would think.
So can you speak to therapeutics, just briefly, as they relate probably to children? Therapeutics is Regeneron, is any of those things being used with children? Do they have it locally? Is it available? What's the protocols?
Yeah, it is. That's a doozy of a question. Thank you very much. And here's the honest answer. There are very few teenagers that would qualify for using Regeneron. If you look at the numbers that we've had to admit to the hospital, they're small. We don't see many that are approaching that precipice. Regeneron is one of those medications that is best given as you are getting sicker and might be going to the hospital. But we'd like to keep you out. It can be used on admission, and we do. But the numbers to support Regeneron clinics for teenagers are few and far between. And so we basically, if we think we have a patient who is COVID positive and getting sick enough that we might need to admit them, but not there yet, we would directly talk with our infectious disease team to see what we can do. But it is available. We understand that part, but it's always under that specialty consultation at this point. And I have not had the need to call them. Either of the small number that I've had to admit from the emergency room, it was clear they needed admission. And I haven't had anyone in the clinic who was so close that we were worried that we needed to initiate outpatient treatment.
Well, thank you. Good to know. So we still have a lot of questions. And so we want to honor Mornay's commitment to us. We did say we have you out of here at 5 o'clock. Yeah. At 8 o'clock. You could tell I'm a little tired too. But so I just want to take some time to go through your packet, say some thank yous, and just share some hope. So we just want to give a huge thank you to all of you for all of your questions. Thank you. I'm very thankful. I know that Anna and Jared are very thankful too that you all showed up, that you're all watching, that you participated, and we proved to a lot of people that we are a very civil town with a lot of smart, compassionate people, even when we disagree. Our commitment to you, the whole vision for this event, and these gentlemen who are gracious enough to join us on this journey was to prove that we could all be in the same room with different opinions, that they would be safe, that you're accepted, that we support your choice. And that we can be a community that can have this conversation without politics for our kids, even if we can't have it in other capacities, we can for this one. This absolutely means the world. And they all took a leap of faith. I made phone calls that said, we don't know what we're in for. But as you can tell, these are all consummate professionals who love this community. And I would say that the need is still great and that this is going to explode. And if they're willing, we would probably be willing to do another one. So stay tuned. So with that said, in your packets, you have bios of our speakers just to give you some extra information. And there's a packet that has the text phone number, and underneath that page is a the QR code. And it's a survey for you to tell us, was this worth your time? Did you enjoy it? What more information do you want and need? Because what we know is that this is the long game. We know we're coming into the holidays, we're going to be looking at the new year, and there's probably going to be a lot more workshops, whether it's just a vaccine workshop, just a homeschool workshop, just an independent study workshop, or another panel. We know all of those things are possible. And so the information is going to continue to change. As the state continues to move and pivot, we're going to get more information. I will tell you, I am confident that all of these gentlemen and the people that represent the district, everybody is committed to transparency and great communication and problem solving. We might not like the solutions that we come to because of the confines, but everybody's willing to have the conversation. And I think that's really special for our community. So please take the time to answer that survey. Also in there is a letter from the district. You can use that letter to advocate if you're pro-vaccine, if you're pro-mandate, or if you're against it. So it really was neutral. All of the contact information from our legislators are there. And there's a sample letter in there for you to use as well that you can literally just fill in, or you can type it, you can email it, you can fax. I would say there is probably not too many phone calls, too many faxes, or too many emails that can happen for our legislators because we are probably the minority. And so I just want to say thank you. I am a huge Bailiff fan. This man has put himself out there to be attacked, and he just gives it to the data. And same with Dr. Gaborko for jumping up and being here. Mitch, I appreciate you taking all these questions and representing our. Please go ahead. He gets.
There's a form letter in your packet, but you heard me advocate earlier for you to reach out to your state legislators. And I just want you to know that I know your state legislators personally, and just like everybody on this stage, they are good people. They are all good people, and they just want the best for their communities. So when you communicate with them, and I can tell you as somebody who gets a lot of communication from the public, it's okay to come from a place of passion because you feel passionate about something. Try your best not to come from a place of anger because that just drowns your voice. Come from a place of passion and with a positive attitude, and trust me, you will be heard much louder and better.
And I will just say too, I want to say thank you to Ed. They've got a lot of heat, right? And so it did take some bravery and courage to be here because he wasn't sure what he was in for. And I really can confidently say that the district really cares about our kids and is going to do whatever they can do with the resources they have to give us options. And so that's going to be a journey that we're all going to go through. Thank you, Jared, for representing your community and charter schools. And then Matt, I appreciate you coming home and talking to us. And just know that we will have a lot more conversation. So truly, all of these options are for us to start the journey of figuring out what's best for our families. So thank you so much. They said they will stay. But please fill out the survey. Please take the time to fill that out for us. So we will be, just last thing, we will have a newsletter and opportunities for you to reach them and us, and we will do more for you. So thank you for coming.